she was still okay, but I could tell that she probably wasn't. I screamed, carried her upstairs. I know Patsy and I, Burke, our son, who's 9, every family member.
Burke, does he stay asleep or do you wake him up and send it? What happens to Burke?
Burke was in bed. We got him up, don't remember what time, but we had him go to a friend's house. I told him his sister was missing.
Told him the truth.
Told him the truth. We didn't try to make it as easy on as we could, but he cried immediately, so he knew something seriously was wrong, and he went to a friend's.
Is important. That's what I'm saying. Like, I wonder if there's something in there, like, even, so I know in the Dr. Phil, one of the things that came out was the idea that you used a flashlight to put him to sleep and that he came back down to play with a toy. Like, when he's down and people are sleeping, has he ever talked, like, did he get the sense that someone else was in the home? Did he hear anything? I don't know how long was he up?
No, we've never asked him that. I don't know. I didn't know, frankly, that he got up again.
Mm.
I'm not sure he did. Again, that's fiction. There's so much fiction.
From the moment JonBenét Ramsey's tragic story hit the headlines, all eyes turned to her brother Burke as the prime suspect. Fingerprints on that pineapple bowl, his quirky interviews, even those old sibling squabbles that got blown way out of proportion. The media frenzy painted him as the guilty kid in a fit of rage, but dig a little deeper, and those so-called clues. They're shaky at best, not direct enough to nail anyone, and riddled with bias from tabloid hype and armchair detectives. So if it wasn't Burke, then who the hell was it? What evidence points to the real culprit? And most importantly, what twisted motive drove them to do something so unthinkable to that innocent little girl? When you start peeling back the layers of motive in the JonBenét Ramsey case, it's clear from the get-go that Burke Ramsey, just 9 years old at the time, didn't have the kind of deep-seated drive that would lead a child to intentionally kill his little sister. The idea that Burke was consumed by jealousy stems largely from how JonBenét became the family's golden child, especially after their mother, Patsy, beat ovarian cancer in the mid-1990s. Patsy threw herself into JonBenét's world of beauty pageants, turning the 6-year-old into a Pence-sized star with glittering crowns, custom outfits, and endless rehearsals. Housekeepers who worked in the sprawling Tudor-style home on 15th Street recalled how Patsy doted on her daughter, treating her like a project, to showcase the family's success. Linda Wilcox, who cleaned for the Ramseys from 1993 to 1995, described Patsy as someone who poured her energy into whatever caught her fancy, first Burke's school activities, then JonBenét's pageants once the girl was old enough to compete. Patsy was always doing something for the children on her computer. Wilcox said in a 1998 radio interview, but it was clear JonBenét's budding celebrity status shifted the balance. Burke, meanwhile, faded into the background, spending his time with a knit group of neighborhood friends or tinkering with his model trains in the basement. One telling anecdote came from Wilcox herself. During an Easter gathering, JonBenét twirled in a fancy $90 custom dress, drawing oohs and ahs from everyone around. Burke, feeling the sting, turned to his mother and asked, "Mom, am I fat? What's wrong with me?" Everybody's oohing and ahing over her. It was a heartbreaking glimpse into a boy's insecurity, not a harbinger of violence. Patsy brushed it off, but the moment stuck with those who witnessed it, highlighting how JonBenét's pageant life amplified the natural sibling rivalry without ever crossing into something sinister. Tabloid rags like the Globe in 1999 seized on this dynamic, sensationalizing it into a motive for murder. They claimed Burke snapped in a fit of rage over being ignored, perhaps triggered by something as trivial as JonBenét sneaking a pineapple snack on Christmas night. But John Ramsey, in interviews as recent as 2024, dismissed these stories as nonsense, insisting there was no evidence of such explosive anger in his son. The family's own accounts and those close observers painted a different picture. Burke felt sidelined, sure, but he channeled it into his own world. After Patsy's cancer remission, she viewed JonBenét as her divine intervention. Miracle, lavishing attention on the girl's talents while Burke was left to his devices. Psychological analysis in true crime discussions, like those from experts reviewing the case files, suggest this led to resentment, rather than outright hatred. Burke wasn't plotting revenge, he was just a kid navigating a home where his sister Sparkle often eclipsed his own quieter pursuits. Friends and neighbors, including the White's daughter Daphne, who played with JonBenét, noted that Burke had his own circle, sleepovers with the Walker and Stein kids, and didn't seem fixated on his sister's fame. It was sibling rivalry at its most ordinary, amplified by the family's wealth and Patsy's pageant obsession, but hardly the stuff of premeditated murder. Then there's the infamous feces smearing incidents, which tabloids twisted into evidence of a disturbed, angry child lashing out at his sister. Linda Hoffman Pooh, the Ramseys' housekeeper in 1996, was the primary source for these stories. She recounted finding Burke's feces smeared on the bathroom walls around 1993 or 1994, during the height of Patsy's cancer battle, when the household was in chaos. More pointedly, Ploog claimed Burke had smeared feces on JonBenét's Christmas gifts in 1996 and even on her bed at times. These acts, occurring when Burke was between 6 and 9, were linked in her mind to his embarrassment of his mother, but they painted a picture of a boy acting out in bizarre, regressive ways. Burke's isolation compounded this. He often played alone in the damp, cluttered basement, setting up his elaborate train sets while the rest of the family buzzed upstairs. Pogue described the basement as a place that freaked JonBenet out, cold, dark, and rarely visited by anyone but Burke or the help. He wasn't hiding in rage, he was retreating into solitude, a common response for a child feeling overlooked in a high-pressure home. But science tells a different story about these behaviors, one rooted in trauma and neglect rather than seething anger. Psychiatrists analyzing the case, like Dr. Werner Spitz in discussions around the 2022 anniversary reviews, point out that feces smearing, known as scatological issues, is a classic sign of emotional disturbance in children under stress. It's not uncommon in kids from affluent but emotionally distant families, where parents like the Ramseys were out of touch, as Wilcox put it. Burke's actions coincided with major family upheavals. Patsy's life-threatening illness left the kids in the care of nannies and grandparents, and the shift in attention to JonBenét's pageants likely exacerbated his feelings of abandonment. Regression like this, reverting to infantile behaviors, is a cry for attention, not a prelude to violence. Studies in child psychology, echoed in analysis from sources like the American Academy of Pediatrics, show that such acts often stem from unresolved trauma or developmental delays, possibly even mild autism spectrum traits, though Burke was never diagnosed. Videos and interviews from experts in 2022 forums emphasize that kids in cold, image-focused homes regress to express frustration, not to harm others. Burke's isolation, playing solo in the basement, mirrors this. It was a safe space amid the family's superficial perfection, not a breeding ground for murderous intent. These weren't calculated attacks on JonBenet, they were the messy outbursts of a hurt kid, far more reflective of vulnerability than vengeance. The golf club incident, often cited as proof of Burke's violent tendencies, turns out to be another overblown tale when you examine the facts. It happened in the summer of 1994, 2 years before JonBenét's death, when Burke was 7 and his sister was 4. According to John Ramsey's own police statements and family accounts, the siblings were playing outside in their Charlevoix, Michigan, vacation home. Burke was practicing his swing with a golf club, and in a backswing motion, he accidentally struck JonBenet on her left cheek. It caused a bruise and a small nick, nothing that left a permanent scar or required stitches. Patsy rushed her daughter to a doctor, who confirmed it was minor. John later described it in interviews as a terrible accident, emphasizing that JonBenet had wandered too close behind her brother during his practice. Multiple sources, including analyses of the Ramseys' depositions and true crime breakdowns, affirm this as unintentional. Burke lost his temper in the moment, but it wasn't a deliberate assault. Critics on online forums sometimes spin it as evidence of sibling abuse, but the consensus among those reviewing the case files is that it was a one-off mishap, common in active kids playing rough. Importantly, there are no records of similar incidents repeating. This was the only documented physical altercation between them. John Ramsey, in 2024 Reflections, reiterated that it was just kids being kids, underscoring how the media inflated a childhood accident into something ominous. No other reports of Burke hitting his sister emerged from nannies, housekeepers, or family friends, making it an isolated event rather than a pattern of aggression. Despite these isolated flare-ups, the relationship between Burke and JonBenet wasn't the toxic brew some theories suggest. Descriptions from those inside the home paint a picture of a loving, if uneven, sibling bond in a family obsessed with appearances. In the 2016 interview with Dr. Phil, Burke remembered his sister fondly, calling her a ray of sunshine, who brought energy to the house, which was rarely mentioned in the analysis. He spoke of her with warmth, not resentment, recalling how she'd tag along or annoy him in typical little sister fashion. Friends like Daphne White, daughter of the Ramseys, close acquaintances Fleet and Priscilla White, played with JonBenet, but noted the siblings' interactions were minimal yet amicable. They didn't clash often because their lives rarely overlapped. Burke hung out with neighborhood boys for sleepovers, while JonBenét had her own playdates. Putting it all together, Burke simply lacked the motive to intentionally kill JonBenét. The jealousy angle is built on shaky ground, tabloid hype, and hindsight interpretations of family snapshots, not hard evidence of malice. If anything happened that tragic Christmas night, it could only have been accidental, like the golf club swit, a momentary lapse in a child's play, not a calculated act. As investigators sifted through the Ramsey family's sprawling Boulder home, the evidence pointing toward Burke remained frustratingly circumstantial, never quite crystallizing into something concrete. Take, for instance, the heavy Maglite flashlight found on the kitchen counter and a small Swiss Army knife discovered in the basement look like to point out Burke as the prime suspect. Yet, as investigators peeled back the layers over the years, these pieces of evidence revealed themselves to be frustratingly ambiguous, laced with alternative explanations, and lacking the forensic punch needed to pin anything definitively on the young boy. The flashlight first caught the eye of detectives during the initial sweep of the Ramsey residence, a sturdy black Maglite sitting innocuously on the kitchen counter amid the chaos of the crime scene. In the Burke did it scenario, this unassuming tool transforms into a weapon of opportunity, wielded in a flash of childhood frustration, perhaps over a late-night snack or a toy dispute in the wee hours after the family's Christmas festivities. Experts featured in the 2016 CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, speculated that such a heavy object could have delivered a significant blow, aligning with the injuries noted in the autopsy report. The theory gained traction when forensic pathologist Werner Spitz demonstrated on camera how the flashlight's weight and shape might match certain marks, suggesting a scenario where Burke, known for his occasional temper tantrums, lashed out without fully grasping the repercussions. Tabloid headlines screamed about the killer flashlight, and online forums buzzed with recreations, pointing to Burke's fingerprints allegedly on a nearby bowl of pineapple, a snack JonBenét had consumed shortly before her death, as evidence that the siblings were together downstairs when the rest of the house slumbered. But here's where the narrative starts to fray. The flashlight bore no fingerprints at all, not Burke's, not anyone's, as if it had been wiped clean or simply unused in any violent act. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation examined it meticulously in 1997, testing for blood, hair, or fibers, and came up empty-handed, no trace evidence linking it to the tragedy. Moreover, the injuries it supposedly caused weren't the most critical aspect of the case. They paled in comparison to other elements that pointed away from a simple blunt force mishap. Adding another layer of doubt, John Ramsey, oldest son from his first marriage, John Andrew Ramsey, later revealed in interviews that he had gifted his father a similar Maglite flashlight as a present, one that matched the description of the item found in the kitchen. John Andrew, who was out of town during the holidays, confirmed this in depositions, noting that his dad often kept such tools around the house for practical purposes, like checking the fuse box or navigating dark corners during power outages. This duplicate flashlight muddied the waters further. Whose was it, really? Burke's access to household items was unquestioned. But so was everyone else's in the family. The lack of direct forensic ties meant the flashlight remained a tantalizing red herring, a prop in a theory that couldn't quite hold together without more concrete proof. Detectives pondered if it had been moved from its usual spot in the basement or garage, but without fingerprints or residue, it was just another household staple, not a smoking gun. Shifting focus to the small red Swiss Army knife, found in the basement near where JonBenét was discovered, this item emerged as another puzzle piece in the Burke did it puzzle, whispered about in police reports and housekeeper testimonies as a potential tool in the unfolding horror. The knife belonged to Burke, a gift that reflected his boyish interest in whittling wood, carving sticks into makeshift swords or trains during lazy afternoons in the family's expansive home. Linda Hoffman-Pugh, the Ramseys' devoted housekeeper who had been with the family for months leading up to that Christmas, painted a vivid picture in her interviews and book excerpts of Burke's habit of leaving wood shavings scattered across carpets and furniture, a messy pastime that drove her to distraction. One day, frustrated by the constant cleanup, she confiscated the knife and stashed it away in a linen closet on the second floor, tucked high on a shelf amid folded towels and spare sheets, a spot she claimed only she and Patsy knew about, as John rarely ventured into domestic chores and Burke was too young to reach it without help. I took it away from Burke and hid it in a linen closet near JonBenét's bedroom, Hoffman-Pugh recounted in a 1999 interview with the Boulder Daily Camera, emphasizing how she'd grown tired of the boy whittling indoors and risking injury to himself or others. She insisted that Patsy was aware of the hiding place, as they often discussed household management during her cleaning shifts, but the children were kept in the dark to prevent further mischief. Yet, When police combed the basement during their initial search, there it was, the knife, resting on a countertop near a sink in the dimly lit utility area, far from its supposed secure spot upstairs. This relocation fueled speculation in the Burke theory. Perhaps the boy retrieved it during a late-night escapade, using it in a moment of play gone wrong, or even in the staging that followed. Online sleuths on forums like Reddit dissected the detail, arguing it placed Burke in the basement, knife in hand, aligning with his known affinity for tools and gadgets. Hoffman-Puch herself expressed bewilderment in her statements, telling investigators she couldn't fathom how an intruder would know about the hidden knife, let alone move it downstairs, implying insider knowledge. But the evidence faltered under closer inspection. No fingerprints, blood, or fibers linked the knife to any specific act, and its presence in the basement could be explained by simple forgetfulness or someone else's intervention. Hoffman-Puch admitted in depositions that she might have used it for odd jobs around the house, like cutting strings or opening packages, and Patsy could have relocated it without mention. The knife's blade showed no signs of recent use in anything nefarious, and forensic tests revealed nothing incriminating. In the broader context of the investigation, it became just another household item out of place in a home full of clutter, not a definitive marker of guilt. John Ramsey, in later reflections, dismissed the knife's significance, noting Burke's innocent whittling as a common boyhood hobby, far removed from the shadows cast by the tragedy. Although there is no evidence to prove Burke was the prime suspect, the evidence to Burke was with JonBenét on the night of the crime is very clear. The bowl of pineapple, discovered on the kitchen table the morning after JonBenét was found, contained chunks of fresh pineapple mixed with milk, a snack that autopsy results later revealed had been in the little girl's stomach, undigested, suggesting she consumed it roughly 1 to 2 hours before her death. Linda Hoffman-Puch, the family's housekeeper, painted a vivid picture in her interviews of Burke's fondness for this exact treat. He often prepared it himself, grabbing a bowl from the cabinet, scooping pineapple from the fridge, pouring in milk, and stirring it with a large teaspoon that matched the one found beside the bowl. Puch emphasized that a 6-year-old like JonBenét wouldn't have managed all those steps alone, opening the fridge, handling the container, and putting everything back, making it unlikely she fixed it without help. Patsy Ramsey, in her police statements, denied knowing about the pineapple or preparing it, and John echoed her confusion, insisting neither he nor his wife would have left such a mess out overnight. Yet, forensic tests confirmed Burke's fingerprints on the bowl itself and Patsy's on the accompanying glass of tea, placing at least 2 family members in contact with the items. In his 1998 interview with Boulder police, Burke initially seemed oblivious when shown a photo of the bowl, hesitating with a drawn-out, "It's a bowl of something," before identifying it as pineapple, his demeanor shifting noticeably as if recalling a forbidden memory. True crime analysts, like those in the 2016 documentary, speculated that the siblings might have rendezvoused downstairs for a midnight snack, perhaps after sneaking out of bed, with JonBenét joining her brother out of curiosity or hunger. The pineapple's presence in her system, unmatched by any dinner remnants from the Whites' party earlier that evening, pointed to a post-bedtime activity, and Burke's prints suggested he was there. Hoffman-Puch added depth to this scene, recalling how Burke's independent streak often led him to forage for snacks late at night, a habit born from a household where the kids were left to their own devices amid their parents' busy social calendar. This detail, while circumstantial, wove Burke into the timeline, hinting at a shared moment between the siblings that could have escalated into something unforeseen, though no direct evidence tied the snack to any conflict. Burke's own words further fueled the notion that he wasn't tucked away in bed as initially claimed, self-placing himself downstairs after everyone else had retired for the night. In his 2016 appearance on De Guerre, Phil, 2 decades after the tragedy, Burke casually admitted to slipping out of bed once. Everyone was kinda in bed, venturing downstairs alone to tinker with a new toy. He described the house as quiet, the lights low, and himself motivated by the excitement of Christmas gifts, perhaps unable to sleep amid the holiday buzz. This revelation contrasted sharply with his earlier 1997 police interview, where the then 9-year-old insisted he had slept through the night undisturbed, only waking to his mother's screams the next morning. Detectives noted his matter-of-fact demeanor back then, but the Dr. Phil disclosure opened a window into a more active role, suggesting Burke might have been roaming the first floor or basement around the time JonBenét vanished from her room. Family, friends, and investigators, including former Boulder detective Steve Thomas, pondered if this nocturnal wanderlust brought the siblings together. JonBenét, known for her restless sleep and habit of waking up thirsty or curious, could have heard her brother's footsteps and followed him down the spiral staircase. John Ramsey had mentioned in depositions that he helped Burke assemble a toy robot before bed, but Burke's later account implied he returned downstairs solo, perhaps drawn back by unfinished play. The basement, with its toy-strewn train room, was Burke's domain, a chilly retreat where he often escaped alone. But on that frigid Colorado night, with temperatures dipping below freezing, it's plausible JonBenét sought him out for company. Audio experts analyzing the 911 call even claimed to hear Burke's voice in the background asking, "What did you find?" Despite Patsy's assertion that he was asleep upstairs, a discrepancy that John and Patsy later attributed to mishearing. This self-placement by Burke, voluntary and unprompted years later, painted a picture of a boy not fully sequestered in slumber, potentially intersecting with his sister's path in the shadowed corners of the home, though he maintained innocence and no malice in his recollections. The marks on JonBenét's back, two small abrasions spaced about 3.5 centimeters apart, aligned eerily with the gauge of Burke's model train tracks, suggesting a possible interaction between the siblings in the basement play area. Forensic pathologist Werner Spitz, in the CBS documentary, held up the O-gauge tracks from Burke's elaborate set, complete with locomotives and rails that snake-eat through the cluttered wine cellar, and demonstrated how the pins at the ends could produce identical punctures if pressed against skin. Burke's train setup was his pride and joy, a sprawling network he assembled in the damp, dimly lit basement, often playing there for hours while the family bustled above. Housekeeper Linda Wilcox described the space as Burke's sanctuary, cold and foreboding to JonBenét, who feared its darkness but might have ventured down if enticed by her brother's games. In police photos, the tracks lay scattered near where JonBenét was found, and Spitz argued these weren't stun gun marks, as some intruder theorists claimed, but rather the result of prodding or poking, perhaps in an attempt to rouse or play roughly. Burke, in his 1997 interview, spoke animatedly about his trains, admitting he poked things with the tracks during play, a boyish habit that could have turned accidental in a moment of frustration. The mark's precision match, down to the millimeter spacing, led experts like Jim Clement to speculate on a sibling tussle downstairs, with JonBenét interrupting Burke's solitary session. Hoffman Plug recalled Burke's possessiveness over his toys, whittling sticks to add to his setups and shooing away intruders, but JonBenét's curiosity often drew her in, leading to minor squabbles. This alignment, while compelling, stemmed from post-mortem analysis, and lacked direct DNA or fiber evidence linking the tracks to the wounds, yet it positioned the siblings together in that eerie basement, far from their parents' watchful eyes on the upper floors. Burke and JonBenét's habit of sharing rooms during cold weather added another layer to the possibility of their late-night convergence, a routine born from the Ramsey home's drafty layout and the siblings' occasional need for warmth and companionship. The Boulder winters were brutal, with sub-zero temperatures turning the upper bedrooms chilly despite the heating system, and Burke mentioned in interviews that he sometimes migrated to warmer spots when his room felt too cold. JonBenét's bedroom, with its twin beds and pink decor, often became a shared space. Wilcox noted that the girl disliked sleeping alone in her assigned room because it lacked a TV, preferring the pink room, with its VCR for Shirley Temple movies, and Burke would join her on frosty nights. Family dynamics played in this after Patsy's cancer battle. The kids sought comfort in each other's presence, huddling under blankets during power outages or stormy evenings. On Christmas night, with fresh snow outside and the house cooling down, it's conceivable JonBenét slipped into a shared area or followed Burke to escape the chill, their bond overriding bedtime rules. Neighbors and friends like the Whites recalled the siblings as close despite the age gap, with JonBenét tagging along to Burke's play sessions, and this pattern could have extended into the holiday hours, drawing them together in a quiet rebellion against sleep. Burke's Christmas gift, a brand new Nintendo 64 console, served as a magnetic lure that might have drawn JonBenét to his side that night, amplifying the chances of their interaction. The N64 was the hottest toy of 1996, a gaming powerhouse with titles like Super Mario 64 that captivated kids, and Burke unwrapped it with glee amid the family's pile of presents. In his Dr. Phil interview, he admitted sneaking downstairs to play with after bedtime, the console's novelty too tempting to resist. JonBenét, ever the curious little sister, adored games and videos. Wilcox described her watching movies on loop, and family videos showed her dancing to game music or pestering Burke to let her join. The console, set up in the living room or basement, could have emitted soft glows and sounds that beckoned JonBenét from her room, perhaps hearing her brother's excited button mashing and creeping down to watch or beg for a turn. John had helped assemble it earlier, but Burke's solo return suggested a private session, one that JonBenét, known for her insomnia and bottle habits, might have interrupted. These threads, Burke's fingerprints on the pineapple bowl, his admission of being downstairs alone, the train tracks' eerie match to the marks, their cold weather room sharing habit, and the allure of the new game console, intertwined to form a compelling hypothesis that the siblings were together that Christmas night. The pineapple story, rooted in Hoffman-Puch's intimate knowledge of the family's quirks, placed them in the kitchen for a shared snack, while Burke's wandering confession opened the door to basement encounters amid his toys. The track's alignment hinted at playful or probing contact in his domain, and their winter closeness suggested a natural drift toward each other in the cold house. The N64's pull, fresh from under the tree, could have been the final spark, drawing JonBenét into Burke's nocturnal world. If Burke isn't the primary suspect, then who else could it be? The answer lies with the man who claimed he stayed up late helping his son ascend a toy on Christmas night before tucking him in, and who insisted he routinely checked to ensure Burke was asleep, the very same John Ramsey. Whispers of sensitive mistreatment had swirled around the family for years, fueled by a pattern of unusual medical visits for young JonBenét that raised eyebrows among investigators and experts alike. Her pediatrician, Dr. Francesco Biff, documented an astonishing 33 appointments over just 3 years leading up to her death, a frequency far exceeding what might be expected for a healthy 6-year-old girl from an affluent family. These visits, often for vague complaints like persistent bedwetting or minor irritations, yet Biff staunchly defended the Ramseys in public statements, insisting there was no evidence of any prior mistreatment. In a 1997 interview with Kiss TV, he emphatically stated, "There was never any evidence of prior abuse of any kind," attributing the high number of checkups to Patsy's understandable anxiety as a cancer survivor, fearing hereditary issues might afflict her daughter. But true crime analysts and former Boulder detective Steve Thomas questioned this narrative, pointing out that such frequent doctor trips, averaging nearly one per month, could indicate efforts to monitor or conceal something more insidious. Patsy, ever the devoted mother, would bundle JonBenét off to Beef's office for what seemed like routine exams, but the sheer volume suggested a hidden concern, perhaps tied to the girl's recurring private area injuries that would later come to light in the autopsy. Stories from the household staff added layers to this unease. Housekeeper Linda Hoffman-Puch recalled Patsy's frustration with JonBenét's bedwetting, a problem that persisted despite the girl's age, leading to plastic sheets and daily laundry loads. Puch described mornings where she'd find the white blanket already in the dryer, Patsy having stripped the bed at dawn, a ritual that hinted at more than just accidents in the night. These anecdotes, shared in Puch's interviews and her self-published reflections, portrayed a family where appearances were paramount, but underlying tension simmered, with John maintaining a detached calm that belayed any involvement in the day-to-day childcare, until, perhaps, those private moments when no one was watching. The autopsy revelations about JonBenét's private area injuries only deepened the suspicions surrounding John, transforming what might have been dismissed as childhood ailments into a chilling indicator of potential sensitive mistreatment. Conducted by Boulder County Coroner Dr. John Meyer on December 27, 1996, the examination uncovered evidence of both recent and older private area injuries, details that sent shock through the investigation team. Meyer noted abnormalities that suggested not just an isolated incident, but a history of interference, though he stopped short of definitive conclusions in his initial report. Forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht, who reviewed the slides and findings, spoke in interviews about the implications, describing changes that pointed to repeated sensitive mistreatment over time, a pattern inconsistent with innocent explanations. The grand jury in 1999, after reviewing these medical records, even prepared indictments for Child and Patsy for child abuse resulting in death, though District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence for a conviction. Released court documents in 2013 revealed the jury's belief that the parents had permitted to be placed in a dangerous situation, with the private area injuries at the heart of their deliberations. Stories from the Ramseys' inner circle amplified these concerns. Puch recounted in her book how Patsy frequently took JonBenét to the doctor for what she called private area issues, dismissing them as infections or irritations from bubble baths or tight clothing. But the persistence raised red flags. The sensitive mistreatment allegations, while never proven in court, lingered like a fog over the case, with experts like specialist Dr. Andrew Sirotnak from Children's Hospital Colorado testifying in related hearings about how such injuries often go undetected in affluent homes where parents wield power and privacy. Amid these troubling medical histories, John's peculiar habit of keeping a framed collage of photos of his deceased daughter Beth in his master bathroom stood out as an oddity that true crime sleuths have dissected for years. Beth Ramsey, John's 22-year-old daughter from his first marriage, had died in a tragic car accident in 1992, leaving a void that the family rarely discussed openly. Housekeeper Linda Wilcox, who worked for Ramseys from 1993 to 1995, shared a haunting anecdote in her 1998 radio interview with Peter Boyles, describing how she stumbled upon the frame during her cleaning routines. It was a multi-photo collage, capturing Beth from her toddler days through her cheerleading years, inscribed with poignant script like, "Daddy's little girl." Initially, Wilcox found it propped between the sunken tub and the wall in John's private bathroom, a space he claimed as his own, separate from Patsy's adjoining suite. Who keeps a picture of their dead kid in the bathroom? Wilcox mused, noting its intimate, almost obsessive placement in such a personal area. After a major flood in the house over Thanksgiving 1995, caused by a painter leaving a window open during a windstorm, which sent hot water cascading from a faucet for days, the frame was relocated to hang on the wall behind the door. Still in the bathroom, Wilcox recounted the flood's chaos in detail: water soaked through floors, ruining carpets and seeping into closets, but miraculously sparing the precious college. She helped clean up the mess, steaming carpets for hours while the Ramseys were delayed by fog in Atlanta, and watched as John, upon returning, expressed fury over the damage but preserved the frame intact. This story, echoed in Wilcox's statements to police and in books like Lawrence Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, suggested a man grappling with unresolved grief, perhaps channeling it in ways that blurred boundaries with his surviving daughter. Beth's photos, always dust-free as if frequently handled, contrasted with the scarcity of images of John's other children from his first marriage, Melinda and John Andrew, hinting at a fixation that some psychologists have interpreted as a red flag for deeper emotional entanglements. Wilcox's tale added a psychological dimension to the motive theories, portraying John as someone who memorialized loss in private rituals, potentially extending to sensitive mistreatment of JonBenét as a twisted form of connection or control. These elements intertwined with John's inconsistent statements about checking on Burke that Christmas night, revealing a man who seemed to know more about the evening's events than he let on. In his initial police interview on December 27, 1996, John described a serene bedtime routine. After returning from the White's party around 9 p.m., he carried a sleeping JonBenét upstairs, helped Burke assemble a new toy robot in his room until late, and then tucked both children in before retiring with Patsy. He claimed to have checked on Burke multiple times that night, ensuring the boy was asleep, a detail that positioned him as the vigilant father roaming the halls. But as the investigation progressed, John's story shifted. In a 1997 CNN interview, he downplayed these checks, saying he only glanced in briefly before bed and didn't hear anything unusual. By the time of his 1998 deposition, the narrative evolved further. He now asserted he hadn't checked on Burke at all after the initial tuck-in, contradicting his earlier insistence on routine monitoring. This discrepancy caught the attention of detectives like Linda Arndt, who noted in reports how John's calm demeanor that morning belied any real surprise at the unfolding horror. Stories from the household staff bolstered the suspicion. Wilcox recalled John's hands-off approach to bedtime, rarely involving himself in the kids' routines, while Hoffman Pook described a family where John maintained emotional distance, focusing on work. Yet, on that specific night, John's detailed recollection of helping Burke with the toy, down to the robot's assembly, suggested he was acutely aware of the downstairs activities, perhaps because he was piecing together a timeline to shield what really transpired. Grand jury testimonies in 1999 probed these inconsistencies, with jurors questioning why John would lie about such a mundane act, unless it concealed his knowledge of the night's events. Former FBI profiler John Douglas, hired by the Ramseys, even touched on this in his book, noting how parental statements often unravel under scrutiny when covering for family secrets. John's evolving account about monitoring Burke painted him as someone intimately familiar with the household's nocturnal stirrings, raising the possibility that he intervened in a crisis he alone fully understood, all while crafting a facade of ignorance. John's behavior further proves that he is the one behind this case. In the chaotic hours following the discovery of the ransom note on that snowy December morning in 1996, John Ramsey's actions transformed the family's home from a potential crime scene into a contaminated mess, raising red flags that have haunted investigators for decades. As the first officers arrived shortly after Patsy's frantic 911 call at 5:02 a.m., John didn't hesitate to invite a cadre of friends and supporters over: Fleet and Priscilla White, John and Barbara Fernie, even their pastor, Raul Haverstock, under the guise of emotional support. What unfolded was a parade of well-meaning, but unwitting intruders traipsing through the house, touching surfaces, sipping coffee from kitchen mugs, and even tidying up counters in a misguided attempt to help. Officer Rick French and Detective Linda Arndt, the early responders, noted the growing crowd with alarm, but John seemed unperturbed, calmly coordinating as if hosting a somber gathering rather than preserving evidence in a kidnapping. Arndt's report detailed how up to a dozen people milled about, including victim advocates called in by police, their footsteps echoing across the hardwood floors and potentially grinding in fibers or hairs that could have pointed to an outsider. Detectives like Steve Thomas in his explosive book highlighted this as a critical blunder, or perhaps a calculated move, since the ransom note explicitly warned against contacting anyone, yet John ignored it, allowing his allies to roam freely. One particularly telling anecdote came from Priscilla White, who later recounted wiping down the kitchen island, oblivious to how her actions might erase latent prints or DNA traces. The result? A scene so compromised that Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner admitted in a 2015 Reddit AMA that the initial mishandling made it very difficult to discern what was original evidence, with John's orchestration at the center, turning a controlled environment into a free-for-all that muddied every potential clue. When the search for JonBenét intensified around 100 p.m., John's decision to lead the effort downstairs sealed the contamination's fate. Detective Arndt, sensing the morning's tension boiling over, instructed John and Fleet White to calm the house again for anything out of place. Starting from the bottom up, John headed straight for the basement, a labyrinth of storage rooms and forgotten corners where the family stashed holiday decorations and Burke's train sets. He zeroed in on the wine cellar, a small, windowless space latched shut that earlier officers like French had overlooked during their initial sweep. With a flick of the latch, John peered inside and, according to White's later testimony, let out a guttural scream upon spotting JonBenét, wrapped in her white blanket. But instead of alerting authorities or leaving her undisturbed for forensic processing, John scooped her up in his arms, cradling her rigid form as he bolted up the stairs to the living room. He laid her down gently before the twinkling Christmas tree, a poignant image that Arndt described in her report as heartbreaking yet suspicious, John's hands all over her, potentially transferring his own fibers from his dark wool shirt onto her clothing and the blanket. White, trailing behind, recalled John muttering in distress, but the move itself was a forensic nightmare. Thomas and other detectives speculated this was no panic, it was deliberate, as moving JonBenét disturbed the positioning of cords and the blanket's folds, scattering potential trace evidence across the carpet. In a 1997 CNN appearance, John defended his choice, saying, "I just wanted to hold her." But experts like former FBI agent Greg McCrary pointed out in analysis that trained individuals, or those with something to hide, know better than to tamper with JonBenét. The blanket itself, a familiar item from JonBenét's bed, now bore marks of handling that bore the original clues, with John's embrace ensuring his DNA mingled inextricably with whatever secrets it held. Compounding the disruption, John's immediate removal of the black duct tape from JonBenét's mouth was another act that screamed of interference, stripping away a key piece of potential evidence in one swift motion. As he placed her on the living room floor, surrounded by the growing cluster of friends and officers, John peeled off the tape, described in police photos as a strip of industrial-grade black duct, with his bare hands and tossed it aside onto the blanket. Arndt watched in real time, her notes capturing the moment as John flung it down. But she didn't intervene amid the emotional whirlwind. The tape, which autopsy findings later showed left no residue on JonBenét's skin, suggesting it might have been applied post-mortem as staging, could have harbored crucial touch DNA or adhesive traces from the perpetrator's gloves or fingers. In depositions for the 2000 Wolf v. Ramsey libel case, John explained he removed it instinctively to see if she could breathe. But critics like Boulder DA investigator Lou mentioned this in his own reports, noting that tape's pristine condition implied it wasn't forcefully applied during a struggle. Hoffman Pooh, the housekeeper, added context in her interviews, recalling how the family kept similar tape in the basement for odd jobs. But John's Quitchman ensured it was compromised before techs could bag it properly. Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner, in his 2015 online Q&A, estimated the scene's mishandling affected dozens of potential samples overall, but John's direct interventions tainted the most critical ones, from JonBenét to the staging elements. In Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, Arndt's frustration boiled over in her account. She watched helplessly as John orchestrated the room, his calm facade belying the destruction of evidentiary integrity. This wasn't mere panade with aligned with a man who, as CEO of Access Graphics, knew how to manage crisis, perhaps extending to erasing traces that could link him to prior interactions with JonBenét. The purpose behind this whirlwind of tampering seemed clear to skeptics, to obliterate any evidence that might expose John's personal connection to the events, crafting a narrative of external threat while shielding family secrets. By breaking the scene seal with invited guests, John ensured footprints and fingerprints overlapped, diluting any singular trail. Moving JonBenét not only disrupted JonBenét's original positioning, potentially hiding how she was placed in the wine cellar, but also allowed his DNA to intermingle, masking older traces from sensitive encounters. Removing the tape destroyed a prime surface for foreign DNA, while loosening cords could have erased handling marks. Thomas theorized in his book that these acts were deliberate, aimed at contaminating samples that might reveal prior sensitive mistreatment, as the autopsy hinted at chronic issues John would want buried. In a 1998 police interview, John claimed ignorance of forensic protocols, but his Navy training and executive acumen suggested otherwise. Stories from the day amplified this, as Arndt radioed for backup. John coordinated with his pilot for a quick getaway to Atlanta, only halted by police insistence, his focus on escape rather than preservation speaking volumes. The grand jury in 1999 saw through it, indicting him for permitting a dangerous situation, implying he knew and covered up the risks. In the end, how did everything unfold? It all began on that crisp Christmas evening in 1996, as the Ramsey family pulled into their driveway on the 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado, around 8 or 9 p.m., after a festive gathering at the Whites' home. The air was thick with holiday cheer, but exhaustion hung over them like the fresh snow blanketing the ground. JonBenét, the vibrant 6-year-old with her curls and pageant smile, might have dozed off in the car. She limped from the day's excitement. Patsy, ever the organized mother, bustled about upstairs, packing for their early morning flight to Michigan the next day, while John, the steady patriarch, helped settle the kids. Burke, at 9 years old and buzzing with the thrill of new toys, wasn't ready for bed just yet. As the clock ticked past 9 p.m., the house quieted, but not entirely. Burke slipped downstairs to the kitchen, drawn by a late-night craving. He rummaged through the fridge, pulling out some pineapple and mixing it with milk in a bowl, a simple snack he often prepared himself, savoring the quiet solitude of the dimly lit space. Around that time, perhaps closer to 10 p.m., JonBenét stirred from her slumber, her curiosity piqued by the faint sounds from below. The house was vast, with its spiral staircase twisting through the levels, and she patted down in her nightgown, drawn to her brother's activity. The two siblings converged in the basement, where Burke had migrated to tinker with his elaborate train set, the tracks sprawling across the cold floor amid boxes of holiday decorations. It was a space Burke claimed as his own, a boy's haven filled with gadgets and games, but JonBenét, ever the tag-along little sister, couldn't resist joining in. What started as playful interaction soon turned tense. JonBenét's enthusiasm clashed with Burke's focus, leading to a moment of frustration. In a split-second lapse, Burke lashed out, striking her with something nearby, maybe the Maglite flashlight, sending her crumpling to the floor unconscious around 10:30 or 11 p.m. Panic set in for the young boy. He tried to rouse her, prodding gently at first, but when she didn't respond, his fear escalated. By 11 p.m., he raced upstairs, his heart pounding, to alert his parents, whispering urgently about the accident in the basement. John and Patsy descended the stairs around 11:15 p.m., their faces paling at the sight of their daughter lying still on the cold basement floor. The house, once filled with holiday warmth, now felt like a tome of secrets. John, with his calm analytical demeanor honed from years as a Navy officer and tech executive, assessed the situation quickly, his mind racing through the implications. Patsy hovered in distress, her hands trembling as she knelt beside JonBenét, but John took charge, ushering Burke back to his room with firm instructions to stay put and pretend to sleep through whatever came next. It was nearing midnight when John realized the gravity, not just the injury, but the risk of exposure from past family matters that an official investigation might uncover. He convinced Patsy that they all faced ruin if the truth emerged, framing it as a family crisis they had to contain. As the clock struck 12 on December 26, John began orchestrating a cover, drawing on household items to create a diversion while Patsy, in her panic, followed his lead. They worked in hushed tones, the basement's chill amplifying their urgency, transforming the space into a makeshift stage for deception. By Vom, John had shifted gears, deciding against their initial impulse to remove JonBenét from the house. Too risky under the cover of night, with neighbors' lights still flickering and the possibility of being spotted. Instead, he opted to keep everything contained within the walls, adjusting the plan to point suspicion outward. Patsy sat at the kitchen table around 2 a.m., scribbling out a lengthy note on a notepad from the counter, her words tumbling out in a mix of fear and fabrication. The demand for $118 mirrored John's recent bonus, a detail he subtly guided her to include, ensuring it sounded like an outsider's threat. As the early morning hours crept toward 3 a.m., John moved methodically through the house, erasing traces of the evening's chaos, wiping down surfaces in the basement and kitchen, changing into fresh clothes after a quick shower to shed any lingering evidence. Patsy, still in her party outfit from the Whites gathering, didn't have the same luxury. John urged haste, insisting there was no time for her to freshen up, leaving her disheveled as part of the unfolding narrative. Around 4 a.m., John finalized the adjustments, ensuring the basement door was latched just so, a subtle barrier that would delay any casual search. The family retreated upstairs, but sleep evaded them. John paced, refining his story, while Patsy fretted over the details they'd woven. Burke, confined to his room since the initial panic, lay awake but silent, adhering to his father's directive to remain in bed no matter what. As 5 a.m. broke, Patsy descended the spiral staircase, discovering the note sprawled across the steps, a 3-page missive she'd penned hours earlier, her handwriting betraying the strain. At 5:52 a.m. precisely, she dialed 911, her voice cracking with rehearsed hysteria, reporting the kidnapping while John loomed in the background, his composure a stark contrast. Minutes later, around 6 a.m., officers French and Veach arrived, securing the perimeter but not the entire house, as John calmly handed over the note and began coordinating with arriving friends. The morning dragged on, with police conducting initial searches by 7 a.m., but John grew impatient as the hours ticked by without resolution. Friends filtered in around 8 a.m., the Whites first, then the Fernies, huddling in the living room as John directed quiet conversations about ransom arrangements. By 10 a.m., the house buzzed with activity, victim advocates brewing coffee and officers taking statements. But John slipped away briefly, his movements unaccounted for in a 90-minute window that later puzzled detectives. At noon, as tension mounted, Detective Arndt signed another thorough search, prompting John to volunteer alongside Fleet White. They descended to the basement around 1 p.m., John leading the way to the wine cellar he'd avoided mentioning earlier. With a swift unlatch of the door, he found JonBenét, his cry ebbing through the house as he gathered her in his arms and carried her upstairs to the living room floor. Paramedics arrived by 1:10 p.m., confirming the inevitable, but John's focus shifted to logistics, calling his pilot for a flight to Atlanta, a plan thwarted by police insistence on staying. As the afternoon wore on toward 2 p.m., the coroner's team processed the scene, but John's earlier interventions had already woven his touch into every thread. The family evacuated by evening, relocating to the Fernies' home around 6 p.m., where John began shaping the public narrative. His calls to lawyers and media contacts laying groundwork for the long defense ahead. In the days that followed, from December 27 onward, John orchestrated interviews and legal maneuvers, his story evolving with each retelling, always positioning himself as the grieving father while the shadows of that Christmas night lingered unresolved. Although John's plan for the Ramsey family was meticulously detailed, there were numerous investigative moves by the police directed at the Ramseys, proving that John's scheme was far from flawless. From the moment Boulder police officer Rick French stepped through the front door at 6 a.m. on December 26, 1996, responding to Patsy's frantic 911 call about a kidnapping, the focus sharpened on the family like a lens zooming in on hidden cracks in a perfect facade. French and his partner, Carl Veach, arrived to find John calm and composed, handing over the 3-page ransom note with its bizarre $118,000 demand, a sum that matched his recent work bonus almost to the penny. But as the officers conducted their initial sweep, something felt off. No signs of forced entry, the house's alarm system disarmed, and JonBenét's room undisturbed except for the empty bed. Detective Linda Arndt, arriving shortly after, noted John's detached demeanor as he coordinated with friends who'd flooded the home, Fleet White, John Fernie, and others, turning the scene into a social hub rather than a preserved crime site. Arndt's gut told her to watch the parents closely. She later recounted in reports how John paced methodically, glancing at his watch as if timing an event, while Patsy huddled under a blanket, her sobs intermittent. By 8 a.m., as more officers trickled in, the police had already begun probing the family's story, questioning why they hadn't searched the entire house before calling authorities, especially the basement where French had glanced but found nothing amiss. The note's warnings against police involvement rang hollow as John himself suggested contacting the FBI, a move that seemed calculated to Arndt, who radioed for backup, sensing the kidnapping narrative might be a ruse. The investigation's spotlight intensified on John when he volunteered to lead a secondary search around 1 p.m., accompanied by Fleet White. Arndt had instructed them to look for anything out of place, but John's beeline to the basement wine cellar, a small, latched room overlooked earlier, raised immediate suspicions. He flipped on the light, spotted JonBenét and scooped her up, carrying her upstairs in a rush that Arndt described as like a fireman saving a victim, but one that obliterated the scene's integrity. Officers swarmed the living room as John laid her down, his hands all over her form, loosening cords and peeling away tape in full view. Arndt's report detailed her frustration. This wasn't grief, it was tampering. By 2 p.m., as the coroner's team arrived, the police had cordoned off the basement, but the damage was done. John's actions had potentially transferred fibers from his shirt to JonBenét's clothing, a detail forensics would later flag. Investigator whispered about his composure, in a case where emotions should run raw. John's calls to his private jet pilot for an immediate flight to Atlanta struck them as evasion, prompting them to block the family's departure. That evening, as the Ramseys relocated to the Fernies' home, detectives obtained search warrants, combing the residence for handwriting samples and fibers, zeroing in on the notepad from the kitchen that matched the ransom note's paper. John's bonus records were subpoenaed within days, linking the demand amount directly to him, while Patsy's pageant dresses and art supplies were scrutinized for connections to the cords and tape. The probe deepened in the following weeks, with Boulder PD treating the Ramseys not as victims but as persons of interest, a shift evident when they requested formal interviews on December 27. John and Patsy, flanked by lawyers they'd hired almost immediately, provided hair, blood, and nail samples at a local lab, but their reluctance to sit for unaccompanied questioning fueled the fire. Detectives like Steve Thomas noted in memos how the couple's high-powered legal team, Haddon, Morgan and Foreman, stonewalled requests, demanding conditions like reviewing evidence beforehand. By January 1997, as CNN aired the family's first public interview, police leaks to the media painted them as uncooperative, with tabloids screaming about the note's similarities to Patsy's script. Investigators pored over JonBenet's medical records from Dr. Francesco Buff, tallying 33 visits in 3 years for issues like bedwetting and irritations, probing for signs of prior mistreatment that might implicate the parents. Burke, just 9, was interviewed gently on January 8 by a child psychologist, his responses parsed for inconsistencies about that night. Did he hear anything? Was he truly asleep? The boy's detached demeanor raised brows, but legally, Colorado statutes shielded him from suspicion as a minor under 10. Meanwhile, search warrants expanded. By February, police seized John's office records at Access Graphics, hunting financial motives or enemies, while Patsy's Miss West Virginia pageant memorabilia was examined for psychological clues. Spring brought escalation, with the larger and more specialized unit consulting, their profilers like Greg McCrary advising Boulder PD that the ransom note screamed staging, too long, too personal, with movie quotes like from Ransom and Speed. By April 30, 1997, John and Patsy finally sat for separate interviews at the Boulder, but under strict terms, no polygraphs, limited duration. Detectives grilled John about his bonus and the basement's accessibility, while Patsy faced handwriting experts who'd analyzed the note, finding 24 of 26 letters matching her samples. The session ended tensely, with police requesting more samples, non-testimonial evidence like additional handwriting, but the Ramseys balked, citing media harassment. In June, as the case hit 6 months, authorities flew Burke to Atlanta for another gentle questioning, probing his memories of the Pineapple Bowl and basement play, his answers evasive enough to keep suspicions simmering. The family's move to Atlanta that summer didn't deter the pursuit. Colorado investigators coordinated with local PD for surveillance, suspecting flight risk. The grand jury convened in September 1998, a third probe that dissected every Ramsey move, hearing from over 30 witnesses including the Whites, who recounted John's odd calm that morning. John testified in December 1998, facing questions about his unaccounted for 90 minutes before the discovery, while Patsy's June 1998 cited her bedwetting denials and note authorship. Burke appeared via video in 1998, his childlike responses scrutinized for coached elements. By October 1999, the jury voted to indict John and Patsy on charges of child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime, believing they placed JonBenét in harm's way and helped cover it. But DA Alex Hunter declined to sign, citing insufficient evidence for trial. The move stunned detectives like Thomas, who resigned in protest, blasting the DA's office in his letter for political interference. The scrutiny evolved but persisted. In 2000, the Ramseys sued media outlets for defamation, forcing disclosures that kept suspicions alive. Patsy's 2000 polygraph, privately administered, claimed truthfulness, but police dismissed it as unreliable. John's 2003 political run for Michigan State Representative flopped amid case backlash. After Patsy's 2006 death, focus shifted to John and Burke. In 2008, new DA Mary Lacey exonerated them based on touch DNA from an unknown male on JonBenét's clothing, but skeptics like Thomas argued contamination. The 2013 release of grand jury documents reignited doubts, confirming the indictments. Even as the calendar flips to October 2025, nearly 3 decades after that fateful Christmas night in Boulder, the shadows of doubt still cling to the JonBenét Ramsey case like frost on a Colorado window pane. Whispers persist in online forums and true crime podcasts that the family's polished facade hid something sinister, with many armchair sleuths convinced the Ramseys orchestrated a cover-up to shield one of their own from scrutiny. The unknown male touch DA found on JonBenét's clothing, exonerating the family in 2008, remains a point of contention, dismissed by skeptics as contamination from the chaotic crime scene or even factory handling of her garments. Questions linger about the ransom note's insider details, like the $118,000 demand mirroring John Ramsey's bonus, fueling theories that it was staged by someone intimately familiar with the household secrets. Burke Ramsey's awkward demeanor in his 2016 Dr. Phil interview continues to haunt discussions. Patsy's handwriting similarities to the note endure as a red flag, her cancer-stricken fragility at the time doing little to quell suspicions of her involvement in a desperate bid to protect the family image. And John, the stoic patriarch, faces ongoing scrutiny for his unaccounted 90-minute window that morning and his calm orchestration of friends flooding the home, actions that some see as deliberate tampering rather than grief-stricken panic. The 1999 grand jury indictments for child abuse resulting in death, unsealed in 2013, still echo, implying the parents knowingly placed JonBenét in harm's way, a stain that no amount of time has erased. Recent leaks in July 2025 from a late detective's spreadsheet, listing family members among potential suspects, have reignited these embers, with podcasters like those on Crime Weekly speculating that advanced DNA tech might finally crack the code, or confirm the family's narrative an intruder slipping through the unlocked basement window. In the digital age of 2025, the Ramseys, or what's left of them, have mastered the art of steering public perception, turning the tide of suspicion through calculated media maneuvers that keep the intruder three alive and well. John Ramsey, now in his 80s but sharp as ever, has ramped up appearances on platforms like Fox News and The Today Show, where in September 2025 he passionately advocated for new genetic genealogy testing on the unknown DNA, echoing his calls from CrimeCon earlier that year. He's positioned himself as the tireless crusader, sharing poignant stories of loss while subtly redirecting blame toward Boulder PD's alleged mishandling, as seen in his contributions to the 24 docuseries. Social media plays a key role too. John's posts, amplified by supporters, highlight breakthroughs in forensic tech, with hashtags trending in orchestrated waves. Burke, more reclusive but no less strategic, has leaned on legal victories like his 2019 settlement against CBS for their Burke Did It special, using the win to pivot narratives toward media sensationalism in rare interviews. Family allies, including John Andrew Ramsey, fuel this redirection through podcasts, decrying witch hunts against the Ramseys while pushing for independent reviews of evidence. Even in the face of July 2025's leaked suspect list, John's team swiftly issued statements to outlets like People magazine, framing it as outdated sensationalism and urging focus on emerging AI-driven DNA analysis. These efforts create an echo chamber, where doubt is sown not just about the police but about any theory implicating the family, keeping the public chasing ghosts while the truth remains buried in the past. In the shadowed annals of American true crime, few cases linger like the ghost of JonBenét Ramsey. As the years stretch on, with headlines fading but online forums still ablaze, the saga serves as a stark reminder of how fragile the pursuit of justice can be, especially when evidence becomes a double-edged sword. We've seen how fragments of truth, scattered like puzzle pieces across a chaotic scene, can ignite public frenzy, leading to accusations that ruin lives without ever securing a conviction. The real lesson here isn't just about the importance of gathering facts, it's about scrutinizing their quality with unflinching rigor. Evidence must be more than compelling, it has to be objectively verifiable, stripped of bias from media spin, witness agendas, or investigative tunnel vision. In a world where social media amplifies every whisper into a roar, we learn that raw data alone isn't enough. It's the context, the cross-verification, that separates speculation from certainty. Without that objectivity, what seems like a smoking gun might just be smoke and mirrors, clouding judgment and perpetuating injustice. Consider the peril of rushing to conclusions based on isolated clues, a trap that has ensnared countless cases before this one. A single thread of evidence, be it a misplaced item or an inconsistent statement, can weave a narrative so persuasive it overshadows the bigger picture. But true accountability demands a tapestry, not a loose string. We've witnessed how fragmented facts, divorced from corroboration, can fuel witch hunts, where public opinion convicts before a courtroom ever convenes. The takeaway is clear: justice falters when we isolate elements instead of grading them, failing to weigh how one piece interlocks with others or contradicts the whole. In this era of instant analysis, where podcasters and Redditors dissect details in real time, the discipline of holistic evaluation becomes paramount. It's about linking timelines, motives, and physical traces into a coherent chain, recognizing that a lone anomaly might be noise, not signal. This case underscores the human cost of such lapses: families torn apart, reputations shattered, all because we prioritized sensational singles over substantiated sums. Yet, the deepest insight emerges from the void left by unresolved questions, teaching us that doubt isn't defeat, it's a call to deeper inquiry. When evidence lacks directness, when it's circumstantial whispers rather than irrefutable shouts, it reminds us to further, to demand linkages that withstand scrutiny. We've learned that no single datum should bear the weight of condemnation. It must be bolstered by a network of corroborations, each angle examined for flaws in objectivity. In the Ramsey saga, this principle echoes through the decades, a cautionary tale against the allure of easy answers. It compels us to ask, what if our rush to judge blinds us to the nuances that could unlock the truth? And in a system where innocence is presumed but often eroded by innuendo, how do we ensure that evidence serves justice, not just judgment? These reflections aren't abstract. They're the hard-won wisdom from a case that refuses to fade, urging us to approach every mystery with measured eyes, lest we perpetuate the very darkness we seek to dispel. What overlooked connection might change everything? And are we brave enough to keep searching?